All right, so we can go ahead and get started today. Welcome, everyone. My name is Amanda. I am an admission counselor at California Lutheran University, and I'm here to talk to you guys about kind of this next step in your life, college, right? And you're on this journey and starting this college search process. And I know that it can be daunting trying to walk through this and navigate what it is to look for a college and apply and go through this whole process. So my goal today is to kind of share some things with you, particularly about how to find the right school for you, the right fit, as that's a really important piece of this search process. And this is one of 4 sessions that we are doing. So the next session is next week, Wednesday, same time, 3 o'clock. And that session is going to be about the cost of college. So what's in the cost, and kind of go into college eyes wide open about how the financial piece of it works. That's next week. The week after that, we're going to be talking about how to apply to colleges, right? So what applications you might need to be doing, how different schools might have different applications, all of that. And then our last session in 3 weeks is going to be a Q&A session with some current college students. So those students are from the institution I work at, which is California Lutheran University, and they're just going to be able to answer questions. They were just in your shoes recently, and so they'll be able to kind of get on screen and try to answer those and let you know what their experience was like. But today we are talking about finding the right fit for you and trying to see what factors of a college are important as you go through this process. So we can go ahead and kind of get started here. There are over 5,000 different colleges and universities in the United States. And that can be kind of daunting, right? Overwhelming. How are you supposed to choose the one college that's right for you? But there's a process to this, right? It's one, it doesn't happen overnight. And 2, there's a lot of steps you can take to try to find what's going to be the right fit for you and the right fit for the school. Not every student is fit for every school, right? You want to narrow down to the things that are important to you, and we'll go over some of these things. So today, these are the things that we are going to be talking about. First, we're going to identify what pieces of a college are important to you, what factors are something that you really prioritize, and what are some things that you don't really care about quite as much. Also understanding your options. So what kinds of schools could you go to, and what do those look like as far as looking at all options you may have. Next, we'll talk about getting into the actual schools that you do want to go to and advice for a successful search through this process once you've kind of found what schools you would like to be attending. So this first step, identifying what's important to you. So we know your time is very valuable, especially going into senior year, right? You're dealing with classes, your last year of high school, all the important social things that are going on with that, in addition to trying to pick the college you want to go to for potentially the next 4 years, right? That's a big deal. So your time is important, and we want to try to save you time through this by focusing on the schools that have the things that you actually need and want. So these are a few of those things. I think this is a really important thing these are all really important things to consider. So first we have majors, right? What majors are offered, and are those areas of study important to you? So if you're a student that already knows pretty much what you want to major in, then you should be looking at schools with that major, right? That just makes sense. On the other side though, if you're a student who is not really sure what you want to major in, that's fine too. Maybe this particular piece of criteria is not as important to you, right? Maybe you're not going to a school for that specific major, maybe you're looking at other things. Another thing to look at is location, right? How far do you want to go? Do you want to be within a day's drive away from family, or a plane flight away from home, or 2 hours away, or right next door? Like where's that limit for you? If family is really important, if you want to be home for holidays, maybe you want to pick somewhere closer. If you're on the other side and you want to be really adventurous and go somewhere new and experience a different place in the US, then maybe that's something to keep in mind as well. So location, that's important. Size, this is another really big thing to be keeping in mind. And size means so much more than just the number. So the institution could be a small school, which is less than 5,000 students, a medium school, which is 5 to 15,000 students, or a large school, which is pretty much more than 15,000. So those are kind of the breakdown of what those words mean as you're looking into different schools. And As I mentioned, the different size has large implications as to what the environment will be like at that school. So for example, are you looking for a lecture class where you're in a sea of hundreds of students and you really get that big school environment? But maybe, at bigger schools, the professors don't teach all of the classes. The graduate assistants teach a lot of the classes and will grade the papers often. And so you have a little bit more distance between you and your professor. But if that big school is important to you, then maybe that doesn't matter as much. Or if you're on the other side, if you're really interested in a small school, that means that you're going to have professors that have one-on-one relationships with you, personal relationships with each of the students. Personally, in my experience, when I was going through the college search process, I knew I really wanted my professors to know my name. I knew I wanted to have good relationships with them and be able to go to their office to ask questions and get help with tutoring. That was something that was important to me. And so I ended up choosing a small school, the school I now work at, Cal Lutheran. But to other students, that might not be as important. So again, that's an important question to ask yourself is, do I want that big school? Do I want to be in a sea of people? Or do I want that smaller atmosphere of getting that one-on-one attention? Only you can answer those questions, but that does help narrow down your search. A reputation. So this could be something that I think is helpful to think about, certainly the rankings for certain maybe fields of study or different things about the institution and how they rank. The other thing that I will say though, I think sometimes we put too much emphasis on the reputation and kind of forget about all these other things. Because while the name of the school is great, the reputation can be awesome, you typically don't spend 4 years at a school just living with the name. You're living with the people and the community and the professors and the classes and the clubs and the athletics and all of the different things. So sometimes it can make that, if you're only going to a school just for the reputation, just for the name, it might kind of fade away once you're actually in the environment, if the environment isn't the right fit for you. So just something to kind of pair together. I'm certainly not saying you shouldn't focus on reputation, because if that's important to you, definitely follow that path. But also remember that you want the other facets of your everyday life to also be important as well. Athletics. This could be something that some institutions have, some don't, some have bigger athletic programs. And this could be if you're a student athlete currently and you're looking to play at an institution. Some schools are, D1, D2, or D3 schools, and they are all different, the division that they're in. D1 schools are going to be a lot more intense, obviously, and certainly have that higher caliber potentially of athlete. But one of the things about D3 schools, going on the opposite end of the spectrum, is you can also focus on your schoolwork a little bit more than you may in a D1. So something to keep in mind as well. And if it's not in the field, maybe that's athletics in the stands. If you're someone who really likes going to sporting events and cheering on your school, then maybe seeing what athletics are offered at the school you're interested in, that's helpful too. Do they have a basketball program or a football program or a cheer team or whatever it is that you're interested in? Next, another factor to consider is the religious affiliation of the school. Is that important to you? Does that bother you? Any of those things are going to help narrow your search and try to find the one that is the better fit for you. And then lastly, of course, student activities. So things like community service or employment on campus, right? All of those things that will fill your days as you're at the school, all important things to think about. Couple other things we do want to mention here. So the campus environment, this one is really important. So just the simple question of asking yourself, how does it feel to be on campus, right? And where will I go on the weekends? That's another thing to keep in mind. If it's a high commuter school, maybe there are a lot of students who don't live on campus, but maybe live off campus. How does that make you feel if it's a little more quiet on the weekends? How will I stay active? That's another important, if that is important to you, that's a great question. Are there hiking places? Can I go walk around campus? Is it close to entertainment? Maybe that's important to you. Maybe you're someone who really loves concerts and you want to make sure you can go to all the concerts you want to. Then maybe that piece of the location is important. Maybe it's not. That's just kind of something you ask yourself as you go through these questions. And I do see a hand raise as well. I will be sure to get to questions, absolutely. At the very end of this, I do have a Q&A portion, and I would love to hear any questions or thoughts and kind of go through those. So as you're going through, if you have a question, keep it in your brain or write it on a note or in your phone or however you want to, so I can make sure to answer those toward the end. So the next step here, academic opportunities, another really important thing to think about. Of course, this is college, right? We're going there for a lot of things, but especially an academic experience. Questions like, will I get help preparing for grad school? Are you planning on going to grad school? If you are, maybe be thinking about how your undergraduate institution can help you with your graduate studies as well. For example, at Cal Lutheran, we have a number of different advising programs where students actually meet with faculty, advisors, professors who help prepare them for grad school, whether that's preparing for the MCAT, if they're trying to go to med school, or whatever standardized test might come next, or just kind of helping with grad school applications. That's something that might be important to you. Another question, will faculty help me find internships, make connections to employers? Again, that's probably only going to happen if you have a close relationship with the professors, and that probably will only happen at smaller schools. Of course, I'm not giving a blanket statement. This could happen with bigger schools as well, but I think it's more likely when you're in some of those smaller schools, and seeing if that's important to you. If it's not, then that's okay. It's not something you really have to think about too much. And then, of course, ways to get involved. Are there clubs and organizations that you're interested in? If you like to dance, is there a dance team? If you're really passionate about the environment, is there an environmental science club? Whatever those things are that matter to you, do they exist on that campus? Maybe it's something that you've already done in high school and you want to continue in college, or maybe it's something that you want to start fresh and try new activities and new involvements in college. Taking a look at the list of clubs and organizations that different colleges have can be really helpful as well to see if there are things that are important to you there. So next I want to talk about understanding your options, right? So we often think of college as straight from high school, straight to a four-year university, which could be possible, but there are also other options as well. That first one being community colleges. And so this can be really beneficial. One, some colleges in California specifically do have free tuition, and for those community colleges. That can be a huge benefit. Some schools also can focus on trade-specific programs as well, something to keep in mind. And the other thing I wanted to mention is transfer agreements. So this can be really helpful. Essentially, if you're looking to start at a community college and then transfer to a four-year university, there are some transfer agreements that exist between community colleges and four-year universities. Specifically in California, there are some agreements with some CSUs, so UCs and Cal States and things like that. What that does is it basically allows you to take community college classes and maybe work with someone at the community college to say, yep, I want to make sure I'm taking all of these classes because I know based on the program, they're all going to transfer to the UC school I'm trying to go to or whatever school it is. And so some community colleges have those programs and have those agreements. So that can be a huge benefit as well. You're not just taking classes mindlessly, you're taking classes will be able to transfer to that next step at that four-year that you want to go to. Other thing to keep in mind, California versus other states. So some community colleges, most of them in California can be pretty highly based on general education classes, so like English, math, history, all that good stuff. But sometimes out of the state of California, the community colleges are more trade specific, which can be great if that's the route that you want to go. But if it's not, that's also something to keep in mind as you're looking at the community college. See what classes they offered and if they are academic classes, if that's the route that you want to go in. But definitely give yourself time to explore these options. I know when I was in high school, I never really considered too much the community college route, but the more I thought about it and the more I think hopefully you can think about it as well, the benefits could be something that is the right fit for you. And again, each student, it's different for each student. So be able to assess this, ask yourself these questions and see if this is right for you. So we had community colleges. Next, we have our public colleges and universities. So at these, you can get your bachelor's degree and more. So this will allow you, if you are looking for grad schools or for master's degree, PhD programs, those typically exist at these universities as well to kind of as you go up through the educational process. Some of these schools are state funded as well. So like the UCs, Cal States, CSUs, all in California. And that is something to keep in mind, typically because the in-state tuition for California is going to be different than out-of-state tuition. So if you are looking for state schools in your state or out of your state, keep in mind that that tuition might vary depending on whether you're in that home state or not. So that tuition does change. And they do come in all sizes as well, those public colleges and universities. As I mentioned earlier, keeping in mind in-state versus out-of-state tuition, not only the tuition kind of sticker price, but also sometimes with public schools and bigger schools have what's called impacted majors. And impacted essentially means that there are more students that want to take the class than there are actually seats in the classroom. And so that can be pretty tough when you're really trying to take that class and it keeps getting filled and keeps getting filled. And so with that impacted class, it typically means it takes longer to graduate. So let's say you look at an in-state public school, the tuition is cheaper, but maybe it takes you 5 or 6 years to graduate instead of 4. That might be a difficult balance because of those impacted classes. So it's also something to consider as you go through this process, whether you're talking about 4 years without an impacted program or potentially longer if you are in an impacted program. So here, the kind of third option for different academic opportunities are private and independent schools. So this can be small liberal arts schools or large research universities. Some of these have faith-based settings, right? So it's a religious affiliation. Some have specific academic offerings that might not be at other schools. Another thing here I kind of just touched on is the focus on completing, right? And so that finishing maybe even in 4 years is a little bit more probable, I would say, at private and independent schools than at those larger schools that might have impacted programs. Certainly not a guarantee every single time, one way or the other, but that focus is at least on those individual students completing their degree. Also, access to internships, research, study abroad. So for example, if you're doing research as a student at a, let's say, private college, the student themselves gets to choose what they want to research, right? So it is a little bit more driven by you, the student. Whereas maybe if you're doing research at a public university, the professor who's mentoring you is going to get to choose that topic that you're researching. And you'll kind of come under them and assist through their research. Both are great options, but just kind of asking yourself, is that important to you to be able to research what you want to research and set that out for yourself, or to come alongside a professor who's probably, really experienced in that field and kind of come under what they want to study. Other things to consider about private and independent schools, there are really unique financial aid opportunities as well. So while private and independent schools their sticker price might be a little bit higher, they typically do have more resources to provide more academic scholarships, for example. So I wouldn't write this off immediately just because of the price. Another great thing is this interdisciplinary studies options. You can create your own major sometimes, which is really cool at some of those smaller private or independent schools. So this last phase I kind of want to talk about here is talking about getting into the ones that you want and the admission office and process as a whole. So I highly recommend getting to know that admission process. One of the things you ask is, how do they look at students? People who are evaluating your application look at your application differently based on the institution. So the first thing I will say when we go over this is every school is different. There's not one cookie cutter way, there's not one blanket statement of how every university looks at students. So keep that in mind as you're visiting maybe different colleges in person or virtually like this, or on phone calls or in emails, asking that college what their approach is to reviewing applications can be really important. So I highly recommend doing that. While there's no cookie cutter blanket statement, as I mentioned, there are a couple different buckets that different institutions fall into in their approach to reviewing applications. And so these are the three buckets here. The first one is holistic. Now in this, we look at your entire application as a whole student, not just a GPA. So here you'll see we have GPA is just one part of the application, but we're also looking at who you are in and outside of the classroom. And that can sway our decision. So if the GPA isn't super strong, but if there are other factors about the student who in class and out of class, then that might be part of what makes that decision on the student's acceptance, right? That's holistic. At Cal Lutheran, we use the holistic method, so that's something I'm very familiar with. Then we have your automatic. So with automatic admission, really all a student needs to do is meet the requirements and then they are admitted. So some colleges might have automatic admission or everyone who applies gets admitted, or everyone who meets a certain GPA gets admitted. This typically happens with like community colleges or some state schools. And then lastly, you have highly selective institutions. So this requires that you kind of pass the GPA test before you move on to further review. So in those, everyone over a certain GPA can move forward in the review process, and everyone else does not. So those are kind of how those three different approaches work. But as I mentioned, I highly recommend connecting with your admission counselor at the institution you're looking at and ask them this question: what's your approach to reviewing applications? So you can have a little bit more insight when you're submitting yours. It's so important to tailor your application. And this might seem kind of obvious, but there are humans that read these applications and they want to hear your story. I know when I was applying to colleges, I kind of thought my application just went into this magical abyss, and a few months later I got an admission decision. But I didn't realize that there are real people on the other side that get to read your application. I read hundreds of applications each year, and I do read all of them, and I read the essays and the letters of recommendation, and I really try to understand the student. And we want to hear your story. So I think it's important that you can be an advocate for your own admission to the school. So let's say freshman year was a real bummer and you didn't do super well freshman year with your grades, but you're really trying to improve. Maybe explain that in your application. Maybe your teacher quit halfway through the year and it made it super tough to, get the teaching you needed. Maybe there were family issues that were really tough. Maybe you moved schools. Maybe you had a learning disability you didn't know until after freshman year, right? All of those things are really important, especially if the school follows a holistic application approach or review approach, then that can be really important for them to see. We want you to treat your application like your story, that you're telling your admission counselors about who you are and who you could potentially be at their college. So keep that in mind as you're applying as well. It's going to be important to familiarize yourself with the application itself. So this is kind of a little teaser to 2 weeks from now when we talk about how to apply. But just to give you a little tidbit of information, the Common Application is one type of application that exists. I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but essentially the Common Application is one online application that you can send to multiple schools or universities. So instead of sending one application to this school and one application to this school and another application to that school, you can send one completed application on the Common App and send it to a bunch of different schools. And that's online. It's thecommonapp.org. But not every institution is on the Common App. Cal Lutheran is, hundreds of schools are, but some might not be. If you're looking at a school, they might not be on the Common App. If they're not, some have institution-specific applications. So it's for that institution only. The UC system, for example, they have their own application process for all of the UCs is housed in one area. So it's different for different schools. Be looking into them, talk to the admission counselors, figure out what that is for the schools that you're interested in. I have a couple last pieces of advice for you on this successful search as you continue to move forward. So one of the questions we get is, should I apply for early notification? I'm going to walk through 3 different terms we have here. The first is early decision, and then you have early action and rolling decision. So early decision, if you decide to apply early, like in November-ish of your senior year, if you apply early decision, you're essentially committing to the school. So you say, I'm applying to you, and if you accept me, then I automatically commit to you. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Early action, however, is not that. It's non-binding. So you can apply early, you don't have to commit, but you still get the peace of mind of getting that application done early in November. You don't have to worry about it anymore. But that's a really important distinction as you move forward and you talk to schools. Keep that in mind. Early decision versus early action. One is binding, one you commit to them if they commit to you, early decision. The other one, early action, non-binding. It's just a way to get your application in earlier. And then you have rolling decision, and rolling decision is kind of your application is reviewed as it's received on a rolling basis. So then the question, should I always apply as soon as possible? Normally I would say, yeah, get that application in sooner. It gets it off your back. It means you get a decision in sooner. The only time I would recommend maybe taking a step back and thinking about it is if you really want us to consider your first semester senior year grades. So if you think about it, if you're applying early in November and you're submitting your application, you're submitting your transcript, you haven't finished your senior year yet. You haven't even finished your first semester senior year in November. So when you apply early, we're only looking at your freshman, sophomore, and junior year on your transcripts. We don't get to see senior year until later, but not when we're making your admission decision. So if you're a student, like I said earlier, like if you really struggled freshman year and you're like, man, that was such a bummer, I didn't do super well, but I've been doing better since then. I've worked really hard. And maybe you really want that first semester of senior year to boost your GPA. You want to show your admission counselor, like, look, I'm still improving. At that point, I would recommend waiting and maybe not applying early, but applying by the regular admission decision, which is typically in like January or February, depending on the institution. Because at that point, you'll be finished with your first semester of senior year. So that those grades will be included on your transcript. Hopefully that would boost your GPA and we'd be able to look at that piece as well. So that's the only time I would recommend potentially waiting and maybe not applying as soon as possible, simply for that reason. Lastly, here we have keys to success, right? So a couple last takeaways I want to recommend to you as you go through this process. Getting to know the school and the place, the environment that you might be considering, I think is super important. So take advantage of visit opportunities if you can. If you're able to take a tour in person can be super helpful. Making contact with your counselor, oh, I cannot recommend this enough. I love chatting with students who are going to apply to Cal Lutheran. I love meeting them and then reading their application a few months later. You'll hopefully get a lot of questions answered. I know this was a big overview of the admission and college search process, but if you're really interested in a school, asking them about the specifics of their process can be super beneficial. Even getting connected with students and professors. So as I mentioned, the last iteration of our 4 sessions is a Q&A panel with some of our current students. And it's so helpful to ask them, like, so what is life actually like at this school? Like, do you actually really like your classes? Do you really like your professors? What's the campus environment like? All of those are super important. Also, I think it's so important to be open to options. So try not to narrow your search too quickly. I know sometimes students have that dream school, and that's fantastic. Absolutely, go for that dream school, right? Visit, apply, that's great. But maybe also open your mind to considering some other options as well, in addition to. I will say that the path to college is rarely ever a straight line. It's not what they show in the movies or on TV, but as you go through this process, I think it's rare to have a very clear aha moment, a super easy application, and a super easy acceptance. It happens, but sometimes life surprises you and things turn up a little different. Maybe your desires change as well, and it's okay to change your mind. Like I said, it's not movie perfect, but in my personal experience and a lot of other people I know, sometimes it's a zigzag line to college, and that's great too. Also remember that colleges are selective, so I think it's important to have honest and realistic expectations as you go through this. Focus on yourself. Don't worry about what your other classmates or what your friends are doing. I know it's so easy to compare, where they applied to or where so-and-so got into. But at the end of the day, it's your life. It's what you get to experience for the next 4 years. And if it doesn't have a fancy title to it, that's okay, because you're the one that gets to experience all the joys of it. So my last piece of advice is just to enjoy this process. I know it can be a lot, but we are here to help. Your admission staff at any institution wants to help you through this and wants to give you kind of the best experience we possibly can. So with that, I will open it up for some Q&A to see if there are questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for just a moment. We'll see if there are any questions that come in. Feel free to use that Q&A function if you do have questions. So we are going to share this screen one more time, and I'm going to give it a minute or two to see if we do have any questions pop in here about the college search process, about visiting campus, or what colleges you should select, any of the new terms I talked about. I'll give it a moment to see if any questions come through. Okay, great question. Rinaldo, how will schools take into consideration the credit or no credit scores during COVID? This is a great question. So often, most of you are probably familiar, but during COVID, I know a lot of high schools did decide to not really give students an A or a B or a C, but just say credit or no credit because, you know, we were transitioning to online school, that whole process. So I think it's different for different schools, certainly, but I think there is a lot of grace involved, right? So we've now read a year of applications last year of students who finished their spring semester with that credit versus no credit. And I will say, at least at Cal Lutheran, the way that we read holistically, it's something we give a lot of grace to, and it's something that we simply don't factor into the GPA. So with that, when we're looking at what the student's GPA is, that credit versus no credit, it can't factor into like a number in a GPA. So we're just looking at the GPA that they did receive in maybe the classes after that. So at least for us, there's certainly a lot of grace given. Something that I typically look at, and I think often admission counselors look at what we call an upward trend. And so what that means is seeing positive improvement. So let's say like maybe freshman year, things weren't so great, maybe GPA wise, or maybe they were okay. And then you have sophomore year is all credit, no credit. So it's hard to see whether they improved or not. But then junior year, it continues going up. And maybe first semester, senior year, it continues going up more. That's really positive. And I don't see that credit versus no credit scores as a negative thing. At bigger institutions, there might be certain policies on how they're viewing that. But because it's such a big thing across the board, it's really hard for us to say kind of no or see negative things about something that impacted the whole world. So hopefully that answers that question. My specific recommendation, if you're asking about a specific school, is to check with them. Sometimes they have policies on their website, or checking with their specific admission counselor from that institution can be helpful as well. Another question that just came through from Lucia. What is a good GPA, and is it really worth it to wait until first semester of senior year? Super good question. So I think good GPA, I think, depends on the institution itself. So I'll give the example from Cal Lutheran. When students ask like, oh, what does my GPA need to be? We don't have a minimum GPA to get admitted, but I can tell students an average GPA. So of all of the students that we admitted last year, for example, the average weighted GPA was a 3.8. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. That means out of all of the students who applied to us, the average GPA that we admitted was a weighted 3.8 GPA. So of course that means that we accepted students both below and above that GPA, but 3.8 was right in the middle. And of course weighted meaning that we count AP classes and honors classes to count for that extra grade point. So is it really worth it to wait until first semester of senior year? I would say that depends on the institutions that you're looking at applying to. If you're applying to like a highly selective institution and you really want that first semester of senior year to boost your GPA, then maybe that's something to consider. But if you're applying to something like Cal Lutheran, and I just told you our weighted GPA is a 3.8, and you say, my weighted GPA is a 3.9, then I would say maybe you don't have to wait. If you're above our average of all the students we admitted last year, then you'll probably be okay there, or even a 3.8, right? So I think it depends on the institution that you're looking at, if you really do want to wait. And maybe that also means like applying to some early and applying to some after first semester senior year, right? You don't have to do all of them at the same time as well. All right, next question here from Kasara. I haven't taken my PSAT because my junior year online was so extremely jam-packed. Yep, totally can understand that. Didn't get the opportunity. If you don't take them senior year, will it impact you negatively? Sure, I know some colleges are letting it slide due to COVID. Super good observation. So let me just move around so I make sure my light doesn't turn off here. So with the SAT specifically, so I can answer this kind of for SAT and ACT. With Cal Lutheran, and I know a lot of institutions, especially the UC schools, have moved to what we call a test optional policy. And so this, just for your knowledge, was something that the UC schools and a number of different California schools were planning on adopting kind of right before COVID hit, actually. So we were not, it was kind of serendipitous that it happened at the time of COVID when, you know, nobody had access to taking SATs. We were already planning on dropping that requirement. A lot of UC schools were already planning on dropping that requirement in the year 2020 when everything went down. So that is something going forward that I know a lot of institutions are holding to, is this test optional policy. Oh, sorry about that. I gotta get the lights back on. This test optional policy, right, where you don't have to submit test scores for SAT or ACT, but you do, and it won't hurt you through the admission process, right? My guess, as I know kind of different schools have it different ways, but look online, like it's really as simple as Googling the school you're interested in and then searching test optional policy or ACT or SAT scores or tests and seeing what pops up on their website. We have implemented test optional moving forward. So every student that applies from here on out doesn't need to submit those scores. And I think the UC system is very similar. So I would look into that, especially because of COVID, but even into the future years, we are really trying to move away from that just because we didn't find it as useful or as equitable for all students who may not have had access to as many resources to prepare for those tests. Next question, do schools look at weighted or unweighted GPAs? Yeah, so this depends on the institution. So some schools will look at weighted, meaning we count your AP tests or AP scores, classes, and your honors classes, and maybe any college classes. We count those for an extra GPA, so you could potentially get above a 4.0. Some schools look at weighted, some look at unweighted. Again, that is very institution specific. At Cal Lutheran, we look at weighted, some look at the other. So hopefully that will be on their admission websites as well. Do colleges focus a lot on extra curriculums? Yeah, so is this like activity, if I'm understanding this question correctly, is it like activities that you're doing outside of the classroom? So yeah, this is really important. I think sometimes I get applications where a student doesn't list any extracurricular activities. They don't list a club or a sport or a job or anything at all. And that can be kind of hard because then I don't really know who the student is or what they do outside of school. And while I don't think that's going to make or break the application, it is really helpful. So it's not like if I get an application that's great otherwise, but they list no extracurriculars, immediately deny them. That's not how that works, at least at Cal Lutheran. But if a student is kind of on the brink, if maybe their GPA isn't super strong, but I see they're, you know, an athlete and they've done it for 4 years, or they've been in this club for 2 years and then became the president of it. Or, you know, extracurriculars doesn't just have to be club involvements. I think that sometimes is a myth that students sometimes think like, oh my gosh, I got to join 50 different clubs and, you know, find the cure for cancer and like all of these things that are so intense. But I don't see that at all. I think extracurriculars, anything you do when you're not sitting in a classroom. So maybe that's working a job. Maybe that's taking care of your younger siblings when your parents are working. Maybe that's taking care of a grandparent as well. Maybe that's, I don't know, helping the neighbor or whatever it is that you're doing. I count as an extracurricular, and I think that's something that you should include in your college application as well, because it's something it's showing kind of where you spend your time. When is the latest normally to start applying? Yes, so the common application, which is the common way to apply, although there are other ways as well, opens August 1st, so next month. And then it depends on the school when their deadlines are. Typically, there are two deadlines. The first one is generally in November-ish, and the second one is generally in January-ish, January or February. So those two, I would say, are the deadlines to be considering. So the latest would then be like January or February is when you would need to submit that application. And that's of senior year. Some schools will still accept applications after their deadline. There's just no guarantee that there will be space there. So that is also something to keep in mind as you're going through it. Here, I can kind of stop my sharing here so y'all can see my face. But that is something to keep in mind as well as you're thinking about applying, that there might be the option of applying after the deadline, but it's not guaranteed. So I would keep in mind, say the latest is like January, February, depending on when their dates are. At Cal Lutheran, our early action deadline is November 1st. Our regular decision deadline is January 1st. So those are the dates for us. Other schools are going to be around those times as well. So what happens if you commit to a school and then change your mind? Yeah, absolutely, right? Sometimes you change your mind, sometimes life happens. I'm not sure how that works specifically with like the early decision piece, right? If you apply early decision and commit to them and then decide to change, I'm not certain about that. But I do know that if not in that regard, so let's say you apply to a school, you get admitted, you commit to them, and then you say, wait a second, I actually don't want to go here. Typically, when you commit, that involves an enrollment deposit. At Cal Lutheran, that deposit is, I believe, $450. And so when you say, yes, I want to go to your school, you also pay us $450 to secure your spot at Cal Lutheran. Now, if you then decide that you want to change your mind and you don't want to go to that school, typically that deposit is non-refundable. So you would lose out on that enrollment deposit. It's very rare that students are able to get that enrollment deposit back. So that is the kind of downside of switching that. No, it's not impossible. It's not the worst. If you lose $400, I know that's a lot of money, but at the end of the day, if you need to lose that in order to do something that's better for you, you can do that. But ideally, you would wait to make that deposit until you're certain that that's the school you want to go to. Of course, if things change, we're not going to force you to go to school with us. You just might lose out on that deposit there. What are some ways I can make my essay stand out? Ooh, that is a great question. So I will preface this by saying, if you're really interested in learning the details of this, come to our session in 2 weeks. So not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after that at 3 o'clock. It's our how to apply. I think it's called Ready, Set, Apply. And that's going to be really detailed about your essay and applications and all that good stuff. But I think something that can be helpful when you're writing your essay is to make it authentic to you. So sometimes I find that students feel this desire to like tell their super big, like overcoming story. And not everybody has that story where like, they ran out of a burning car and their lives were saved. Like if you did, oh my gosh, I'm so happy for you, and definitely include that if that's a piece of your story. But if it's not, I don't think you have to force that. So in our office, we've talked about some of the best essays we've read. One of my favorites that I read a few years ago was a student who applied and just started talking about how much they love In-N-Out Burger, like the restaurant. They're like, man, I love In-N-Out. And you know why I love In-N-Out? Because they have these 5 qualities about them and named all the qualities. And then they said, you know what? I actually have all 5 of these qualities, and let me explain it to you. And started saying, this quality relates to me because I like to do these things. This quality relates to me because I like to do this. And it was so interesting. Another great essay we talk about, someone else read a few years ago, was a student who wrote just about all of their favorite pairs of shoes and how each pair of shoe represented a different piece of their life. So their ballet flats represented their love for dance and how they dance every night after school. And her sneakers reminded her of her social life and how she likes to go out with her friends. And maybe this certain pair of heels she always wears when she goes out with her grandma, and how family is really important to her, right? And so you can be creative with these essays without feeling like you have to tell this huge overcomer story of, how you beat all the odds, which again, if you did, amazing, please include that in your story. But if that's not you, you don't have to force that. I think being authentic is a really important way when you're writing that essay. And again, understanding there are people on the other side of it who want to read this and who want to understand you. Last thing I'll mention with this question, I think a really common mistake people fall into when they write their essays is to write about a different person and not write about them. So if the essay is like, who inspired you? And maybe your mom inspired you and she's this wonderful woman who's done great things. And you write your whole essay about like how great your mom is and how much she sacrificed for you and just like the wonderful woman that she is. But then by the end of the essay, I didn't get to learn anything about you. I just read about your mom, which was great. I want to admit your mom now to our school, but I don't know how to admit you because I didn't get to learn about you. So keep in mind, try not to fall into that trap. If you are writing about someone who inspired you, that's great. Write about, the sacrifices your mom made and all of these things, but then shift it and talk about how you're using that to do things in your life and to follow your passions and different things like that. So keep those two pieces of advice in mind. We got one more question. Awesome. Yeah, okay. So this question, should I try to get into a top tier university, even if it means getting a huge chunk of student loans? Yeah, so this is a super good question. I'm glad you're thinking about this. This is going to be up to each student, up to each family and what they can handle. But typically, one piece of advice that I've heard offered is whatever profession you want to go into, and kind of looking up generally what they make per year. So let's say it makes $50,000 a year. I think a safe bet, and this is just one school of thought, you don't have to take it, is trying to not take out more student loans than what you could probably make your first year working in that job. So if your first job, the profession you want to go into, generally makes about $50,000 a year, and you're trying to take out $100,000 in student loan, that is probably exceeding and maybe not the wisest choice. If it's under 50,000, maybe that's a little bit more reasonable. But again, it's so different for different students and different families and different financial situations. And unfortunately, it's a conversation you really have to be honest with and talk with yourself. So the idea of taking out loans in general or at all, this is something that your family or people may have cars. Typically, you don't pay for a car in cash. You could be paying $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 for a car, and you take out a loan, and then you pay monthly on that loan. So taking out loans in general is not a crazy foreign concept. You're investing in a car, right? You're investing in transportation, and similarly, you're investing in your education. So taking out a loan in general could be an option if that's something you're interested in. How much is a really important thing to be asking yourself. Personally, unless this top tier university is offering a bunch of different things that are super relevant for you, I don't know that you should try to go to that top tier university just for the name or just for the reputation or the name on a diploma, right? I don't think a huge chunk of student loan is worth it for just a title on a diploma. Now, if that top tier university also has the exact major you're interested in, the research studies you plan on doing, the grad school opportunities you want to do, the athletic or the clubs, if it has everything specifically working for you, then maybe consider it a little bit more. But if it's just for the name, I would try to look at another institution that might fit you better and hopefully not leave you with big student loans. I think if I could wave my magic wand and grant one thing, it would be less loans for all of our students, just because I think that can be difficult once you do graduate. It's something that's pretty common. And I think if you have a manageable amount of loans, a smaller amount of loans, whatever that means for you, it's more doable. And oftentimes it becomes necessary. But if you're just trying to take out this big chunk for the top tier name, I personally am not sure that that's worth it. But definitely something to think to yourself about, talk to family or friends or supportive people, maybe even talk to the college themselves and let them know, like, hey, this is how much money I have to take out. What do you think about that? And hopefully they'll be honest with you too through that process. how would you use your early decision wisely when applying? Ooh, yes, that is a good question. So early decision, again, as a reminder, is saying, I'm committing to this university. Now at Cal Lutheran, we don't have early decision, so I'm not the most familiar with this, but I can say, I think what would be helpful is if you were to applying early decision to an institution, I would certainly hope that it's an institution you've had the opportunity to visit already. If it can't be in person, at least virtually. Hopefully it's a place that you've already talked to an admission counselor or made connections somewhere, right? You really want to be sure as you're applying that like, hey, I think this is the school that could be the right fit for me. And you can really only know that by interacting with the school a bit more. So I recommend doing that personally. Is at least visiting or taking a virtual tour or talking with an admission counselor before actually applying early decision to that school. So should I go to community college if I haven't participated a lot in high school? Yeah, good question there. So I think if it's solely based on your participation, it depends on what school you're trying to get into. So there are certainly institutions that will accept students if they have a strong GPA, but maybe didn't participate a lot in like extracurriculars. So don't rule yourself out completely. If you really want to go to a 4-year, you're like, man, I didn't join a lot of clubs. That's okay. There are probably still institutions that would be great that you would still be eligible for. Absolutely. But if you have a very clear goal of going to a school that has more selective requirements and you're like, man, I really don't think I'm going to have a chance and you really want to go to that school, yeah, start at a community college. That can be super helpful. Community college is also really helpful if you didn't perform super well academically in high school for whatever reason and you're like, man, I really need a clean slate. Here's a kind of a fun secret I didn't know until I was through this process. When you go to community college after you graduate high school, if you have, I believe it's 30 units, depending on the college or on the college you're applying to. Let's say you go to community college for 2 years and then you apply to a UC school or some other school. They don't need to see your high school transcript at all. All they'll look at is your community college transcript. So if you were like, man, I really messed up in high school, that's okay. You still have a chance to kind of wipe that slate clean, go into community college, maybe fix your priorities, attending free tutoring if they have that, whatever it is, to then boost your GPA. And then when you apply to school after community college, they don't even need to see your high school transcript. They don't need to see SAT or ECT scores at all. They're just looking at community college transcripts. So that certainly can be helpful for clean slate for GPA or for participation in like activities and things if you're looking for like a more selective institution. All right, I will give it another second. I just answered that last question in the Q&A. Give it one more, see if any others come in here. In the meantime, I will mention here that I do have my email on the slide. So please feel free to take that down, ask any questions if you do have them. I'm always happy to chat, whether you're interested in Cal Lutheran or another institution, that's fine. I still want to be able to provide you with as many resources as I can through this process. And I will be presenting at next week's session. I won't be there for the last two, but if you want to chat next week, I'd be happy to see you guys then. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in here, which is totally fine. So at this point, I will say thank you all for coming. It's been a pleasure answering your questions, sharing some things with you. If you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to myself with that email there. I wish you the best of luck through this process, and hopefully we can see you next week. We're talking about the cost of college, and the week after that, we're talking about how to apply to colleges. So have a great evening or afternoon wherever you are, and hopefully we'll see you guys next week. Thank you guys. Enjoy your day.